In 1822, in the dark, oppressive world of slavery in Maryland, a girl named Araminta Ross was born. The world knew her as Minty, a name given to her by her family, but she would later become Harriet Tubman, one of the most courageous freedom fighters in history. Harriet's early life was filled with unimaginable hardships. Born into slavery, she was forced to work from a young age. As a child, she would be sent to check muskrat traps and care for infants of her enslavers. The conditions were brutal, and the punishment for disobedience even harsher. When Harriet was just a young girl, she suffered a traumatic head injury that would affect her for the rest of her life. One day, she found herself between an overseer and another enslaved person attempting to escape. The overseer threw a heavy metal weight, but it struck Harriet instead, leaving her with lifelong seizures, headaches, and visions. But even in the face of such hardships, young Harriet was filled with determination. She knew she was meant for more, destined for freedom, not just for herself, but for her family and countless others still shackled by the chains of slavery. And it was this unshakable spirit that would drive her forward on her incredible journey. As Harriet grew older, she became more aware of the world outside the boundaries of the plantation. Stories of the North, a land of freedom where people like her could live without chains, filled her mind with hope. She knew escaping was dangerous, many had tried and failed. The punishment for attempting escape was often death or brutal torture. But Harriet wasn't afraid. She knew freedom was worth the risk. In 1849, Harriet made her first bold decision: she would escape. Under the cover of night, she crept away from the plantation, guided by her deep faith and the stars. She followed the North Star, which would lead her to the first stop on the Underground Railroad. The journey was perilous, full of dangers from bounty hunters and harsh weather. Yet, with her unmatched courage and cunning, Harriet evaded capture. Every step forward was a step toward freedom. After long weeks of travel, Harriet finally reached Pennsylvania, a free state. But her story didn't end there. Freedom wasn't enough for her if her family and friends were still enslaved. The people she had left behind haunted her, and she knew she had to go back. She made a vow to return and help others gain their freedom. This vow would turn her into one of the most well-known conductors of the Underground Railroad. Over the next several years, Harriet returned to the South time and time again, risking her life to free enslaved men, women, and children. She relied on her knowledge of the land, her faith, and the network of abolitionists who supported her. Harriet led over 70 slaves to freedom, never losing a single one on her dangerous missions. Her fearless determination earned her the nickname Moses, for like the biblical figure, she was leading her people to the promised land of freedom. But Harriet's bravery didn't stop at freeing slaves. During the Civil War, she worked as a nurse, a spy, and even led armed raids. In 1863, Harriet became the first woman to lead an armed expedition during the war. She guided a raid along the Combahee River in South Carolina, which liberated over 700 slaves. Harriet was not just fighting for her own people, she was fighting for a nation's soul. After the war, Harriet settled in Auburn, New York, where she continued her activism. She dedicated her life to helping freed slaves adjust to their new lives. But Harriet didn't stop there. She fought for women's suffrage, knowing that true freedom meant equality for all. Even in her later years, when her health began to fail, Harriet never stopped advocating for justice and equality. Harriet Tubman lived to be 91 years old, and when she passed away in 1913, she left behind a legacy of bravery, sacrifice, and unyielding commitment to justice. She showed the world that one person, no matter how oppressed, can break the chains of oppression and change the world.